this is Daz, and this week's discussion is on a longing for nostalgia. And I've been working in New York City, and it's my first time really spending this much time in the Big Apple, and it's really made me feel a lot of nostalgia just because the architecture reminds me of a lot of old 80s, 90s, early 2000s sitcoms. And I've worked in Los Angeles a lot. I've even lived in Los Angeles before. I grew up in the Midwest in Kansas City and Omaha, Nebraska. I've lived in Texas. And for my job, I travel a lot. And I've had the privilege to visit all 50 states. Not necessarily for work, but even just with family. And I visited Europe and been to Mexico where I have family. I'm on my father's side. And I've also worked in Canada significantly. And I love traveling. I love learning about other cities, states, subregions, countries, and getting to know the people. And one thing I feel like is, as I get older, and sorry if I keep on repeating myself, because I feel like in the last several videos I've talked about my age. As my 30th birthday approaches in September, I think a lot about life, and I think about being a millennial, and as I've mentioned, the elections, and now as we are no longer the youth, but it is Gen Z followed by Gen Alpha. I think about how the dream we were sold, not just me as a millennial, but generations before me, and even those after me, is not what we're getting today. And in a way, I feel like it's frozen so many people. There's almost this weird thing where I've heard people say that the age you were when the pandemic started is the age you're frozen at. So when the pandemic started, in early 2020, I was 25 years old. I had just turned 25. I was sent home from traveling. I was in Saipan. And I also, at that time, was in my first real serious relationship, which was not the healthiest. And I was just really starting to feel more independence, especially aside from college. And just, I'd never been away from home, and then I was home again. And I remember just all my thoughts about the world. They say when you turn 25, that's when your brain finally develops. 28 is when your personality as an adult develops. I don't know. I feel like I definitely am no longer feeling like a teenager, but I also feel very much young. I don't feel like I'm old just because I'm about to have a 3 in front of my new age. I will say that just the nostalgia I feel like a lot of people are reaching for, and just the way people are today, like 40-year-olds aren't what they used to be. 50-year-olds aren't what they used to be. 30-year-olds aren't what they used to be. 20-year-olds are. It's like adolescence anymore is stretching for many people into their 20s. You could say that's a good or a bad thing. It seems like, in a way, that more and more people, maybe because of social media, are admitting they don't have everything figured out. And with that comes a lot of people longing for the past. So the problem with longing for the past is that nothing is quite like you remember it, but we all have, they say everything is 20/20 in hindsight, but I don't necessarily believe that. I think in a way we can see a lot more angles in hindsight when it comes to certain situations, but I also think sometimes we have a way of revising the past, not in a malicious or a manipulative way, but just as time fades, we can start to grow a soft spot. Or, for instance, I'm going to use the instance of high school, or say in high school, college, you just can't wait to get out of it, and then now you're way past high school. You may meet people you knew from then, and maybe whatever bad feelings you had about them, you no longer have because you're so far removed. You've lived enough life where you don't really care. But it doesn't mean that the negative emotions you had or reservations weren't valid, and they still may not be valid. I do feel like with all the craziness going on in the world, sometimes it's easy for people to latch on to time periods, even time periods they weren't alive for or they were too young to remember. The 50s were so much better. The 60s were so much better. The 90s were so much better. And then with all of these quote-unquote aesthetics and the ability to stream old movies and TV shows, people are able to try to recreate retro realities for themselves. And because of that, for instance, even in these campaigns, a lot of times it's about bringing America back to what it was, make America great again. I'm just using that slogan. It's this idea that somehow we can go back to the past. One thing I've learned in life is that when something is done, it's done. And then if you try to get it back, even if you do, it will never be the same. And I'm going to use the example of a relationship. If you and a person are together and you break up, even if you get back together, things won't be quite the same. The relationship will never be the same, because during that time of separation, you both were able to live your lives. Maybe one of you dated, or both of you dated other people or talked to other people. Maybe one of you didn't, but one of you threw yourself into so many different interests that you've grown or changed. The same way that maybe someone didn't and they didn't change, maybe they devolved. So we can't get caught up all the time in always looking toward the past to be our salvation any more than we can get stuck theorizing a future that may or may not happen. And so it's so important to live in the present. But there is this plague of nostalgia fixation. And it's not wrong to admire old fashions, old movies, old shows, or be able to be like, oh, I miss childhood. But I noticed, for instance, a lot of millennials, they have like their own section called millennial core, where they dress up like we did when we were in high school, and people don't want to let go. And it's like, well, sometimes you do. It's healthy. I definitely think this is a byproduct of just people being scared because they're not where they thought they would be. And it's said that, I believe, that we'll be the first generation to not do better than our parents as a whole, which is pretty sad. But I think it's just simply because of inflation, because of everything that's going on in the world. Even when people look at these whole rumors of war and the fact that things keep getting more and more tense, which scripture did warn about, and we look at our weather patterns, we're getting hurricanes in July and August. It used to be September through November was hurricane season, and it's like Houston got devastated by Hurricane Barrow. I know people that were impacted by it that I work with, and now we have Hurricane Debbie, and up here in New York, we've been getting a lot of torrential rain and a lot of flooding, and it's just seeing all of this is like so doom and gloom sometimes. So people just want to go back to a time where things were simple. And let's admit, when we're younger, we're a lot more naive. Ignorance is bliss. Our parents, our grandparents took care of everything. We didn't understand the world as it is. You get older and you understand things more. But also things really are a lot different, and they are getting tougher in certain areas. And really this is why, like I made the video last week about not letting your heart grow cold or bitter, because people do allow that. But also we can't get lost in la la land and delusions of just living in the past. I just wanted to talk a little bit about it because I definitely feel like it is something we're seeing more and more of. And I think with us being on social media and people getting caught in the quote unquote virtual world, it's easier to get lost in it all. But I'd like to know your thoughts. Thank you for tuning in. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Until next time, God bless.